Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint by Sing Shong. Chapter 407. Final Dragon. Part 4. The first shockwave gradually petered out after Kyrios joined us. The difference between 3 lightning-related constellations working together and 4 was rather noticeable. Not only that, but a portion of constellations also lent us their probability after Kyrios showed up, and for the first time ever, our own probability surpassed the Apocalypse Dragon's shockwave. You would dash. Scorched black by the electrical wave, Thor and Dionysus began roaring out as if they had gone half-mad. The latter had drunk such a large quantity of wine that his face was completely red, even though the rest of his body remained jet black. Booze is going down so smoothly, it's so amazing. Now I'm really curious about the taste of Olympus label booze. Give me some. By the time the storm of aftermath for the first shockwave drew to a close, the 2 constellations became completely drunk out of their minds. Kyrios stared at them with criticizing eyes, before asking me, "My disciple, are these fools your comrades?" "No, total strangers. First phase has concluded. Congratulations. You have safely negotiated the first shockwave of the first tail flick. We did it. We managed to withstand that damn tail flick's first hurdle." I looked behind me. Ever yawn. I couldn't continue on. Because a desolate, ruined landscape greeted me, with a sea of corpses burnt by the electrical waves filling it up. Some of them were swept up by the electrical energy we couldn't hold back, while some of them died after their incarnation bodies exploded, unable to deal with the storm of aftermath taking place nearby. The 500-plus constellations were reduced to less than half that number through just one encounter. What an utterly fraudulent death toll that was. Could I even claim that we managed to endure when it was like this? It was just the first phase, so what would we do about the second and the third one? I raised my head and saw the messages from the stars brightening the night sky as if they were losing their minds. The absolute majority of constellations are stunned by the difficulty of this scenario. Many constellations are lodging complaints at the Bureau in regards to the applicable scenario's probability. A portion of constellations are arguing that this scenario cannot exist. The majority of constellations are requesting for the scenario's cancellation. Scenario's cancellation, was it? What a funny thing this was, there still being idiots daydreaming about stuff like that. Applicable scenario cannot be cancelled. All constellations within the applicable scenario's area are urged to prepare for the next phase. No, the apocalypse would carry on. While the messages from the constellations freaking out continued on, the baptism of sponsorship messages also rained down from the other side of the sky as well. Constellation, Lightning Throne, is looking closely at you. Constellation, Spear that draws the boundaries of the sea, is glaring at you. Constellation, Great Mother God who created man out of earth, is getting interested in the fable you might earn. Final Scenarios constellations are focusing on you. Final Scenarios constellations are enjoying your actions. 3 million coins have been sponsored. The constellations of the final scenario, including the likes of the Lightning Throne Zeus, the Spear that draws the boundaries of the sea Poseidon, and even the Great Mother God who created man out of earth, Nuwa. The existences lording over the top stratosphere of Starstream who didn't participate in this scenario, but didn't feel threatened by the unfolding events from the get-go, were there at the final scenario. The location for that scenario was excluded from the first tail flick's area of destruction. Even the destruction of their fellow constellations was nothing more than a type of entertainment to those on the cusp of reaching the end of this world. Second phase will commence 10 minutes later. A 10-minute interval, was it? I breathed a sigh of relief and looked back at Kyrios. I sensed that his status had grown even greater than before. You must have reached another enlightenment, Master. It seems that you're now at the level to discern that, at least. Kyrios's complaining voice sounded thorny. Not only were his looks enough to slap Yu Hyok's face silly, but even the way he spoke slapped the latter silly, too. E.G. Hai sprinted to where we were and began shaking me by the shoulders. A juicy. I thought we'd end up as grilled squid, you know. And why did this kid have to go and use that kind of figure of speech? Curious Grandpa. Where's my Grandmaster? Didn't she come with you? The Breaking the Sky Saint has some matter to take care of first, so she'll arrive later. He replied in a cold tone of voice and peered at me from the corners of his eyes before turning his head away. I thought that my disciple would have been half dead by now and came in a hurry. But I see that he's far healthier than I hoped. I couldn't tell whether he was rueful or relieved from his tone of voice. If you arrived any later, never mind half dead, I'd have been really dead, you know. Let's not worry about that, though. We need to get ready for the second phase. As if he was waiting for it, Yu Hyuk approached us as soon as my words ended. According to the tale of Harmageddon passed down, the attribute for this second shockwave is intense heat. The apocalypse dragon's tail in the far-off distance was visibly getting red-hot. Although it looked to be moving at a very slow speed from here, the truth was, that tail was vibrating at a scarcely believable speed right now. That intense friction heat was powerful enough to distort the axis of spacetime itself. Xing Yusung grasped my jet-black scorched wrist and spoke. A juicy, about the next phase. The moment I saw the determined eyes of both her and Yi Gilyong, I understood what they wanted to say. But Yu Hyuk butted in first. You two must stay back. That cold-sounding declaration caused the two kids to immediately lash back. Why? We're also Kim Dokja Company, you know. What do you know, you sooty bastard? I wasn't asking you anyway. Yi Gilyong's provocation was met with Yu Hyuk's emotionless reply. This isn't the issue of your willingness, but effectiveness. You two do not possess any stigma or skills related to fire. In order to cancel the shockwave, we needed the statuses of a similar attribute. Unfortunately for Xing Yusung and Yi Gilyong, though, they didn't possess any skills related to the fire-type attribute. Gilyong's shoulders trembled as if he was furious. He eventually shouted out. In that case, you also can't fight, then. You don't have stuff like that either. But, I do. The corner of Yu Hyuk's lips curled up as he lifted up his sword. And in the following second, the blade of the dark heavenly demon sword was enveloped in a fire-type sword aura. Character, Yu Hyuk, has activated Furious Flame God Blade LV. You. I gently patted the tearfully Gilyong's shoulders. As stated clearly in the original storyline, Yu Hyuk possessed almost every attribute there was. Hey, now that I thought about it, this guy also possessed lightning-based attribute, so why didn't he lend a helping hand earlier? Yu Hyuk was glaring at me with his narrowed eyes. Have you forgotten how you pleaded with us not to aid you? Ah, I did that, didn't I replied, before flinching just a little. This guy, I haven't said anything yet, so how did he read my mind? I shall announce the constellations that will partake in the next phase. Yu Hyuk, already finding himself in the middle of the constellations, began his selection process. A calamity, unprecedented in the history of the star stream, had come knocking, and for the first time ever, constellations were exposed to the threat of their complete death. Under Yu Hyuk's command, these headstrong and proud constellations found themselves positioned on the front line one by one. I've heard that you're a regressor. Does that mean you have information on this situation? Of course I do. A faint trace of trust could be seen within the eyes of the constellations. The more urgent the situation was, the more valuable information would get. The rumors of Yu Hyuk doing the rounds among the constellations were helping his attempt to instruct them. He only took the blink of an eye to finish distributing the fighting force, standing in the middle of the front line himself. Han Suyong watched him do that and muttered softly. Well, he's the conquering king, all right. Zhang Huiwen next to her nodded her head while polishing her sword. Well, he does have some parts that we have to acknowledge, that's for sure. It pains me to say it, but after Han Suyong Corporation, Yu Hyuk Company might be the next most suitable alternative for our nebula's name. Before the top representative changes, we should create a labor union first, though. A labor union, is it? Han Suyang smirked deeply and looked at Zhang Huiwen. They were working together in the advance party for the intense heat wave. The black flame of the black flame dragon contained the status of red flame, and Uriel's hellfire was permeated with the strength of hell's flames. So, it was the same thing as these two being the strongest main force in the current frontline. I never figured that we'd ever get to fight side by side. It's the same story for me, too. Zhang Huiwen blew away the specks of dust clinging onto her sword of judgment. That hard blade with its dull luster, Han Suyang had clashed against that blade on the stage of Proof of Stars a long time ago. Afterwards, she never had the chance to talk to Zhang Huiwen like this, one-on-one. Well, they didn't really have anything to say to each other, and she wasn't really talented when it came to that sort of conversation, so that couldn't be helped. Even if that was the case, she still had to ask Zhang Huiwen for an explanation this time. By the way, why are you still lugging around that? This? Zhang Huiwen looked at the huge luggage on her back and formed a bitter smile. Yi Hyansong could be seen wrapped tightly on a cross made out of steel frame. This is the only way that I can protect him. But, he looks as if he's already met his noble end, though. Where did you even find a cross, anyway? My sponsor. Constellation, demon-like judge of fire, is nodding her head in satisfaction. You know, this sight comes across as a bit blasphemous somehow. Is Uriel really an angel? Well, even a demon king is like that, so it's fine. The two women's gazes shifted towards the back of the ranks almost simultaneously. Kim Dokja was among those constellations sitting outside the ranks. With a melancholic look on his face, he was pressing the ground with his finger. It was as if he was scribbling something down there. Han Suyang spoke first. Is he writing a will? That might be. I mean, doesn't he make that sort of a face before he's about to sacrifice himself? Zhang Huiwen gritted her teeth as if she had had enough already. If he goes and does something like that again, I'm really going to. First tail flick is recommencing. It was then, a humongous explosion of light could be seen at the far front of the battle line. Get ready. Along with Yu Yonghyok's signal, constellations all gripped their weapons tightly. Constellation, demon-like judge of fire, is issuing clear warnings. The wave of the intense heat burned brightly. After seeing those sun-like red flames that burned away everything in the heavens and on earth without discrimination, Han Suyang spoke in a fed-up voice. God damn it, if only my black flame dragon wasn't defeated. Constellation, Abyssal Black Flame Dragon, says he has underestimated his opponent. Constellation, Abyssal Black Flame Dragon, says that if he had started fighting with both of his hands. Will you just shut up? And then, the intense heat wave swallowed the constellations up. Kugagugagagu. Stuck in the middle of the flooding wave of flames, Han Suyang desperately activated Black Flame. The Black Flame Dragon's status permeated her entire being, and the heat from the wave was rapidly absorbed into her body. It felt as if her head was blanking out and all the fables she'd lived so far were melting away. Kim Dokja was enduring against something like this? The fact that Zhang Huiwen was next to her proved to be a small consolation. No, not just her, but constellations who were second to none when it came to wielding fire were guarding her sides, too. The one who perhaps best represented that was Purifying Flame Agni, over by the very front of the line, defending against the crashing wave of flames by himself. He'd be one of the strongest constellations within Vedas after one excluded the three myth-grade gods of that nebula. And, as befitting a powerful constellation, he was pouring out so much power that his entire being was now lit up on fire as he withstood the intense heat wave. Hell, even the whites of his eyes were showing. Hey, that idiot is actually burning to death. Along with the noise of Tadat, Agni's body began crumbling away in ashes. That served as the starting point, and the screams of constellations reverberated from everywhere next. Kawak. Their line was being forced back with a speed far quicker compared to when pushing back against the electrical wave. Constellations melting down from the intense heatwave writhed around in pain, while the advancing flames used them as their firewood to increase the intensity of their heat. They were losing. Han Suyang's eyes, currently being protected by status, felt as if they were now going blind. The heat nearing her nose made it difficult to even breathe. Before she had noticed it, the intense heatwave had reached right before her. Zhang Huiwen breathlessly cried out. Uriel. Uriel's and the Black Flame Dragon's powers increased and a momentary defensive wall was created. The intense heatwave seemed to waver just for a second there, but then, it began forcing back their statuses once more, bit by bit. Han Suyang's and Zhang Huiwen's shoulders were pressed against each other as they continued to endure. Energies from both Black Flame Dragon were gradually seeping away, as well. From the beginning, the dragon had already spent a lot of its strength fighting in the Dragon Festival, and due to the partial destruction of Eden, Uriel was unable to receive her share of probability and so, her condition was about the same. Nebula, Vedas, is withdrawing a portion of their probability. Nebula, Papyrus, is withdrawing a portion of their probability. Even the nebula supplying them with probability began withdrawing one by one. But, that was only obvious. If they were to spend more probability than what their great fables could afford, then even if they managed to earn a new great fable now, they would still be losing out at the end, anyway. From their perspective, getting annihilated by the apocalypse dragon or by the storm of probabilities aftermaths was just about the same now. Through her blood-stained, dried-up lips, Han Suyang spoke. Damn it, I shouldn't have been worried about Kim Dokja. Worried about me? For a moment there, she thought she felt a certain sense of refreshment enter her, and soon, a familiar power enveloped her and Zhang Huiwen's backs. Han Suyang grumbled loudly. Are you finished writing your will? What are you on about? Nebula, Kim Dokja Company, is supplying you with probability. In Starstream, probability was one's wish, a dream, a desire not to give up until the end on the story that everyone else had given up on already. The ardent wishes of a small number of people who hadn't given up on the scenario were supporting them now. Han Suyang bitterly smiled. How foolish. Why didn't you all run away, then? Where can we even go, anyway? Jihai advanced forward while firing the cannons of the Turtle Dragon. The battleship built with futuristic technology and its hard exterior blocked the intense heatwave instead of Zhang Huiwen's and Han Suyang's crumbling bodies. Great fable, next city, is crumbling away. Jihai writhed in pain as she tried to endure against the flames all by herself. No matter how powerful, Turtle Dragon was as a fable weapon, it was never designed for this sort of situation. Han Suyang cried out in despair. Damn it. Doesn't matter who it is, just hurry up and help. There are lots of you with fire attributes, right? Unfortunately, not a single one in the night sky replied to her. The absolute majority of constellations are watching the nebula, Kim Dokja Company. The absolute majority of constellations are evacuating from the intense heat wave. Constellations of the final scenario are watching this scenario. Weak constellations were too occupied with running away, while the truly strong ones seemingly didn't want to miss this grand show. Is it really only us? Turtle Dragon's external layer melted away, and Yu Yonghyuk quickly carried the unconscious Jihai on his back as he continued to activate Furious Flame God Blade. The intense heatwave that managed to burn everything away in the surroundings began flooding their position once more with a scale they couldn't possibly defend against this time. Not even Uriel, not even the Black Flame Dragon, not even the Maritime War God, not even Kyrios and that Yu Yonghyuk. Thank you for holding on until now. And then, Kim Dokja spoke up. It's fine now. I was confused a bit earlier. Well, it was my first time doing it, that's why. Before Han Suyang could ask what he was talking about, something suddenly rose up from the ground behind her. That was where Kim Dokja had been squatting earlier. There was a hexagram of darkness spread out widely on the ground, and something was being summoned through that very hexagram. Kwa 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 kwa. A gigantic frame began blocking the incoming heatwave head-on. Han Suyang's brows rose up high. Pluto? That something turned out to be the giant soldier Pluto. However, it was no ordinary Pluto, either. There was no way that it'd be able to withstand that intense heat even if it was the giant soldier. The one riding inside Pluto was blocking the wave all alone when various Fable-grade constellations had failed to endure it previously. Han Suyong saw the chilling, dangerous-looking scythe held by the giant soldier and instantly figured out who it was. The thing was, the Fable weapon Pluto didn't originally belong to Kim Dokja. Great Fable, Underworld, has begun its storytelling. Even if it was a story where only a handful wished to see, the scale of probability changed depending on who that handful of people was. And the existence that appeared now was a grand being who could handle such probability all by himself. Constellation, father of the rich knight, has incarnated into the scenario. He was the constellation that protected Olympus' hottest hell. The myth-grade constellation, Hades, had descended on the battlefield with Underworld in tow. Chapter 408. Final Dragon. Part 5. The dark but warm current of air approached us from behind. Since I knew whose status that was, a subtle little grin automatically formed on my lips. To make Underworld be responsible for the probability needed for summoning, I'm still at an age where I'd like to rely on my parents, you see. I heard that youths of the Korean peninsula become independent early in their lives, but I guess I was wrong. I recalled the day I left the relative's place for lodging in a hostel. I was 17 back then. I shrugged my shoulders and smiled. Well, a young man like myself is needed to keep the balance, you know. Constellation, Queen of the Darkest Spring, has incarnated into the scenario. Abruptly, a corner of my heart began tingling just a little. I ended up remembering the empty spots reserved for my parents during school events, back when I was still a student. I always wondered how my friends felt back then. What did it feel like, having someone fill up those spots, having someone who'd come to you when you called out to them? Constellation, Queen of the Darkest Spring, has unleashed her status. And now, I thought I could finally understand what they felt back then. Persephone stood beside me, and while looking at Hades blocking the intense wave of heat, spoke. But, we agreed that it's my turn to ride Pluto this time, him and his short fuse. The heat blocked by Hades spread out like ashes in the air. Perhaps realizing that a powerful opponent had appeared, the Apocalypse Dragon strengthened its momentum as well. Pluto at the far front was getting slowly pushed back as it continued to deal with the intense heat. That made sense, though. Hades was yet to fully unleash his status. Constellation, father of the rich knight, is wobbling as he looks back at his wife. I told you that it'd be not possible with you alone, didn't I? Constellation, father of the rich knight, is looking at his wife with an unfortunate expression. Judging from the unfolding situation, I could more or less tell what was going on here. On the armor of Pluto, with Hades inside, Fables were wiggling about and going on a rampage. Fable, listening to one's wife would get you teok even when you're asleep, has begun its storytelling. Persephone sighed grandly and raised her hands up as if to conduct a concert. And right afterwards, small, musical note-like objects began floating up from the tips of her fingers. Like the introduction of a classical piece, the fable started opening up. Constellation, Queen of the Darkest Spring, is mobilizing Underworld's probability. Hades wasn't the only ruler of Underworld. Indeed, Persephone was not queen consort, but the queen regnant. Meaning, these two possessed an equal amount of shares of Underworld. Hades' attributes were darkness and fire. The guardian of Olympus' night and hell was finally rousing up his true status. Constellation, father of the rich knight, is unleashing his status. For a moment there, an incredible impact force akin to my entire body being smacked around overwhelmed me. I wobbled about, my vision dizzily shaking around, but still, I raised my head to see Pluto standing up there like an incarnation of darkness and fire. Final Scenario's constellations are very dissatisfied. Final Scenario's constellations are keeping a wary eye on father of the rich knight. Final Scenario's constellations are complaining about Underworld's interference. A high number of constellations are impressed by the participation of Father of the Rich Knight. Qua 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 qua. Agni from Vedas was dead, while the constellations tasked with dealing with fire from both Asgard and Emperor had run off quite some time ago. As for Surya, he was using the rays of light from himself to generate something similar to flames and continue his fight that way, but half of his fable had disintegrated already. This was the power of the calamity that hundreds of constellations couldn't stop. And Hades was blocking that calamity by himself. Hades, hasn't it been a while since you completely cut loose like this? Hades roared out, and Persephone continued her vigorous conducting in sync with his roar. Fables flowing out from her hands permeated into Pluto's entire frame. This was the power of Underworld, having long been obscured under Olympus' shadow. They were finally proving themselves. Fable weapon, Pluto, is using the star relic, Aegis shield. Constellations from Olympus also added their powers, as well. Athena lent her own shield, while others sacrificed probability of their own great fables to lend their strengths. Up until now, I always thought that the constellations of the night sky weren't all that impressive. But then, I realized for the first time ever, today, that my thoughts should change. Many constellations are grateful for the King of Underworld's incarnation. The absolute majority of constellations are respectful of Father of the Rich Knight. The absolute majority of constellations are singing the praises of Queen of the Darkest Spring. Now that I've gotten to witness Hades valiantly defending against the destruction of the world, I could truly appreciate what myth was for the first time in my life. The willingness to risk his life when confronted by the world's doom, maybe, that was the epic of heroes that the first generation of Dakibis wanted to show to the constellations. Why are you so dazed like that? It's not over yet, so get your act together. I looked back to find Ji Young Hyuk and a stiff expression glaring at me. He too had been sacrificing himself for the greater cause. What would he be thinking of right now as he watched Hades? Ha ha ha, hey, subway grasshopper man. This is my true power. Kiki, keek keek. Kim Namwon's voice came out from Pluto's head. Ah, so he was also there, wasn't he? Constellation, Abyssal Black Flame Dragon, is enjoying Pluto's madness. Yup, definitely a couple from the original storyline. Second phase will come to an end soon. In any case, the current situation was favorable for us. The flames of the intense heatwave decreased at a rapid rate, and Hades was ably defending against that. Pluto's durability seemed more than enough for the job at hand, and the number of constellations adding their probability also was increasing bit by bit. How long passed by like that? Finally, the flames of the intense heatwave were extinguished. Second phase has concluded. Congratulations. You have safely negotiated the second shockwave of the first tail flick. We were able to withstand this phase, all because everyone worked together. If Zhang Huiwen and Han Suyang didn't try their best, if Yi Jihai didn't charge forward with her battleship, if the Underworld's couple didn't arrive on time. If just one part of that was missing, then we couldn't have stopped it. The absolute majority of constellations are enjoying this great fable. Final scenarios constellations are uncomfortable with this great fable. Finally, we had managed to survive 2 out of the 3 phases. All phases of the first tail flick needed to be subjugated at the beginning in order to minimize the damage. If this was back in the original story, dozens of nebulas would have been destroyed by now and at least 1/8 of the sky crumbled away to oblivion. And some spare time to get ready for the last phase should be given to us again. Kugugugugu. Dokja SSI. Over there. I quickly looked back after hearing Zhang Huiwen's voice, and discovered something flooding out from the apocalypse dragon's tail. But, the intense heatwave phase had come to an end already? This couldn't be. Metatron spoke up as if to put a voice to my thoughts. It's a lot quicker than expected. Scenario's probability is being adjusted due to the entrance of myth-grade constellations. Scenario's probability has increased the phase progression speed. Third phase will begin in 30 seconds. As if to stop the start of the phase, Hades used his status to pressure the apocalypse dragon. Even Persephone and other constellations were looking really concerned right now. My son. If the third phase got underway now, then not even Hades would be able to stop it. His attributes were darkness and fire, meaning, he was not a suitable constellation to defend against the third shockwave. I asked Metatron. How long until the seal is complete? I'm not certain if it can be done in time. A faint trace of despair seemed to have dyed the Archangel's expression. He must have been in the middle of finally realizing what he had done. I shall buy us time. It was Michael who said that. He had been saving up his status up until now. Maybe he was stimulated by Hades's actions earlier, because he began unleashing all of his status and flapping his wings. He was half good and half evil. Metatron looked at the fable appearing on Michael's face and spoke up. Demon King of Salvation. I'm sure you know this already. The third shockwave can only be resisted by existences possessing the power of chaos. The shockwave began stirring in the distance. The previous two shockwaves we had experienced were, technically speaking, not real shockwaves, but simply the harbinger of the third wave. What we were about to face off against now was the true first tail flick itself. Metatron asked. You also have someone on your side with the power of chaos, don't you? I scanned my companions as well as other constellations. Honestly speaking, there was no point in doing that. Not even Yu Yung Hyuk could use the chaos attribute. Because chaos was not an attribute, but more like an anti-attribute, that was why. Now originally, chaos was not a power constellations or demon kings were permitted to enjoy. Power of fruit of good and evil is wiggling inside you. But then, I was both a constellation and a demon king, an existence that couldn't be categorized as either. A demon king who had consumed the fruit of good and evil. It should be possible with you. I nodded my head. The nature of chaos was disorder. If it was me who went against the order of both, it'd be possible to go up against the power of chaos, too. It was then, someone grasped my shoulder. I can also do this. Huiwan SSI? I saw the ring of chaos within Zhang Huiwan's eyes. Her hair, now bleached pure white, slowly danced upwards under the mysterious and ominous aura. I instantly realized what she had awakened as. Very well. Let's give it a shot. I then looked up into the sky. Actually, I had been searching for a certain constellation's presence in the night sky for a while now, but unfortunately, I couldn't sense it. If that guy helped us out, we'd be able to overcome this somehow. I even had a plan in mind for that, too. Third phase is commencing. It seemed that it was too late now. Demon King, King of the Corrupted Angels, is unleashing his status. Constellation, Savior of the Corrupted, is unleashing his status. One existence who possessed two modifiers, Michael displayed his true power and rushed towards the forefront. Indeed, those statuses were more than enough to make him feel confident about himself. Judgment Field. His speciality that almost wrung me to death in the past began stretching out towards the shockwave of chaos. It was the wall of judgment, bestowed onto this world through the divine grace. Qua. The so-called invincible field was easily shattered, however. Forget about defending against the wave, it couldn't even buy 1 second. Michael screamed loudly as he watched his judgment field shatter like glass. The calamity of the 89th scenario, the chaos's shockwave that had far surpassed that of the original storyline, proceeded to crush Michael's body and utterly disintegrate him. Yu Yung Hyuk's voice resounded out from behind me. Dodge it. It seemed that Yu Yung Hyuk had realized something was off. This shockwave was definitely on another realm compared to the previous two. I finished making up my mind and was about to step forward, but then, Zhang Huiwan stood in my way. Huiwan SSI. Please shut up. I knew something like this would happen. Her back, turned towards me, didn't show any movement, as if she knew what I was trying to do. Hyunsong's giant frame was still dangling on her back. I saw his sleeping face, having fallen into the steel-like slumber in order to protect someone. I opened my lips again. Huiwan SSI. If someone must risk their life, then, don't even try it. I'll really go crazy if you do. Fable, Demon King of Salvation, has begun its storytelling. Great Fable, Demon World Spring, has begun its storytelling. As if resonating with her emotions, the two fables began telling their stories. They were acquired through experiencing similar circumstances. Stigma, Sacrifices will LV.8, is currently active. And this stigma was acquired by going through similar situations, too. I was aware of how much this stigma hurt Zhang Huiwen. Even then, I still had to say it. If that wave isn't stopped here, Hien Song SSI will die. I had to become more callous than anyone. There is a way to stop that. If you were me, Huiwen SSI, what would you have done? I don't want to hear it, so please. Zhang Huiwen turned around, her eyes red with tears. Yes, you do have a way. I know already. You're someone like that, Dokja SSI. You always have a damn, stinking plan that only you know, and when you use it, you'll end up dying. I think you're mistaken about something. I'm not going to die. She didn't possess the skill, lie detection. Now is a different story compared to in the past. Huiwen SSI, you and our other companions have changed, yes? I've chosen to do this because I believe in you. That is why, I spoke while turning my head away. Huiwen SSI. You must save me later. I used the powers of Way of the Wind and Lightning Transformation to blow her back to the rear. Kim Dokjae. The moment I greeted the shockwave rushing towards my face, I roared out in my true voice with everything I had. Surya. At the end of my roar, a train rushing forward from behind picked me up. As it was created in haste, the train looked rather bizarre, what with only its front portion existing. Let's go. As I sensed Surya's status supporting me from behind, the train set off. Great Fable, Torch that Swallowed the Myth, has begun its storytelling. The train used the Great Fable as its fuel to advance forward, past the fragments of fables, and towards the chaos's shockwave. Quadadududak. Accompanied by the impact force akin to my entire body being shattered into pieces, the debris of the train flew about all over the place. Michael's half-destroyed incarnation body trapped within the storm was now looking at me. You bastard. I went past him and continued to press forward. It felt as if my consciousness was fading away. The fourth wall continued to issue warning bells, and all the fables I possessed screamed out in pain. They were shouting out in one voice that we couldn't withstand this. That we'd all die for sure. Beyond the shockwave that reverted all existence back to nothingness, I felt the apocalypse dragon's gaze land on me. You cannot stop this. I felt that gaze and smirked. You're right. I can't stop you. Well, you're not a mere life form that can be killed, but the calamity itself, after all. You're something that far exceeds constellations and demon kings. There was no way that a lone constellation could resist against such a calamity. However, I knew of another calamity of this magnitude. Constellations of Starstream have figured out your scheme and are freaking out. Final Scenarios constellations are greatly astonished by your plan. All the Kibis in the Bureau are looking at the scenario's probability. A scarcely believable amount of sparks exploded and went on a frenzy in the air. Simply trying to call out its name caused such a reaction. I let all the probability the constellations had gathered explode out into the open space, and called out the name of a certain creature one more time. A creature that, even though they knew its true name, no one would dare to invite to their scenario. Come. Beyond the shockwave, Starstream's outer space could be seen. The storm of aftermaths produced by the misaligned probability was rushing in. The march of the gigantic fog of darkness began erasing the traces of stars and nebulas. I was overcome by shuddering powerful enough to nearly blank my mind as the giant eye on the far side of that seemingly infinite fog fixed its gaze on this side. I witnessed that thing back in the 73rd Demon World a while ago. Back then, it was merely a clone. It was a different story this time, however. Indescribable Distance is looking down on Final Dragon of the Book of Revelation. The outer god born within the chaos, the greater calamity that brought about the destruction of my demon world was now approaching the Isle of Reincarnators.